Welcome back to the SEO Weekly, where queries are weird, advice is controversial, and everything depends. I'm your host, Garrett Sussman of iPullrank, and each week I cover everything going on in the SEO industry. We're talking blogs, we're talking tools, we're talking updates, we're talking community. We're even talking those SEO Twitter threads that you just can't get enough of. And if you are into this, please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share on the social media. This week, there were some updates to Google Search Console reports. Pretty interesting stuff. We had a national attention with John Oliver via Google's anti-competitive monopolistic behavior and what can the government do about it. And Twitter all of a sudden started making their links follow, like, hey Twitter, can I get some of those links? Is that gonna break SEO? Let's dive in. So first off, tomorrow morning, and if you're watching this in the future, I'm sure it's recorded, but Martin Splitt of the Google Search team is doing a technical SEO hours. In the past, this has been JavaScript SEO hours. Now it's technical SEO hours, but it's a great opportunity to talk to Martin and ask him all your questions about technical SEO and the big G. He gives his honest opinion when it comes to things. And he had that really great YouTube video series all about SEOs and devs, which you should definitely check out. One of the major challenges for SEOs is prioritization. While Google Search Console continues to iterate, recently adding video reports, now they're kind of breaking down their issues reporting to give you different types of prioritization so you can identify what you really need to work on and what maybe isn't as important. Hopefully this new version of reports shall add a little more transparency, or at least the classification is more obvious when you're looking at your website on Google Search Console and what the major issues are. Speaking of Google Search Console, Andrew Shotland of Local SEO Guide, great Twitter follow and dropping some very interesting videos on the LinkedIn these days, notice that you can now compare pages and URLs in Google Search Console, which in the past had been only limited to time comparisons. Now using the filters, you can do comparisons to a specific URL, which is potentially super useful. Now, I'm sure there are a lot more smarter SEOs who are going to come up with some really clever use cases, especially when it comes to regex versions of URLs, but definitely start playing with that. If you have a cool use case, let me know in the comments. I am definitely interested. When it comes to the SERP results, Barry Schwartz reported on a finding from William Alvarez. Now, as SEOs, we search for a lot of weird stuff, and William was looking to find if you should give your dog Allegra, which is medication for humans. And what he found, though, was Google's testing out featured snippet cards. So instead of just giving you one featured snippet result, he actually giving you 1, 2, 3, 4, which I think is really interesting because for those of you who are familiar with the results, there tends to be, or sometimes is, a confirmation bias on your query. So if you're looking on the internet to prove your opinion, you can always find articles that support it. With 4 featured snippet cards, it's kind of giving you a variety of results from different sources. They might not all agree. It's going to be really interesting to see the types of featured snippets that are surfaced when there's more than one. It's just a test, but, and Barry wasn't able to replicate it, but keep your eyes peeled to see if you see more of this. I think it's interesting because always Google wants to surface the best answer, but sometimes the best answer isn't the one that you want. So big news story. Basically, John Oliver on HBO on his Last Week Tonight show did a focus all about tech monopolies, and he talked about a bill that's currently potentially going to be passed by Amy Klobuchar and Chuck Grassley in Congress that would limit, well, they say it limits innovation the way that Google and Apple and Amazon have practices that kind of crush competition. And so this new bill will, in essence, make it illegal for Apple to deny, apps from, having to go through their store for downloads on the iPhone, or, Amazon from, only surfacing like their products at the top of their, in essence, search engine. And then the big one is with Google, which is preferring a lot of their tools and different properties to be the top of search. So that might be Google Maps and local, YouTube videos for, anything YouTube related, the flight widget for, in the travel industry. It's long been argued that Google gives preference to Maps and YouTube and their widgets and whatnot, and that it's not a fair competitive practice. Now, Ram Fishkin did a deep dive because SparkToro was actually mentioned in reference to a study he did around zero-click SERPs. But he dove and kind of railed about this idea, specifically talking about a company called Hipmunk, which is based out of Austin, Texas, shut down a few years ago, but basically had this flight aggregator that Google crushed with when they put their own flight widget at the very top. It's an interesting discussion. Honestly, not to get into politics, but I'm skeptical that anything will happen in the government, but it's an opportunity to make some real noticeable change, which we haven't seen in a long time when it comes to like digital search. We'll see what happens. It's literally like the next month is the best chance. Check out that episode from last week tonight from John Oliver on HBO, or read Rand's argument on SparkToro, but a really interesting discussion around anti-competitive behavior by Google. Lily Ray of Amsive Digital put out her winners and losers of the May 2022 Core Algo update. It's really interesting. So she worked with Systrix, she looked at the data, and some of the takeaways that she found was there were websites that were kind of recovering that were really hit hard back in November, the last algo update. She thinks this one is kind of reversing it, although we are seeing some back and forth that even though the algo update has been rolled out, at the beginning some people were hit hard and then they recovered a lot of their rankings. So always going to keep an eye on how this continues to play out. The other interesting thing that she found is there's increasing wins for e-commerce sites. So like sites like Walmart and Amazon and Best Buy were shooting up in terms of visibility. My theory on this is I've noticed, and tell me what you think, but I've noticed with any sort of ambiguous sort of search query that the intent isn't obvious, Google's pumping in e-commerce results. Like Google is trying to get as many like image packs with products and just product lists and deep dives into products into these results, which in my opinion is why you would see increased visibility for e-commerce sites is where for ambiguous intent where you don't know if the person means to buy a product or they're just looking for information or navigation or whatnot, that they're actually getting these e-commerce related results. Curious to hear your thoughts on that, but the algo update has been out, covered it last couple of weeks on the show, and so we're always going to pay attention to, what is the volatility, what's moving and shaking until, of course, the next algo update. And finally, after 26 ugly years of browser life, Internet Explorer has been retired. No more support. It's not going to work anymore. In lieu of, we're going to start using Microsoft Edge, but yeah, it was a good run, Internet Explorer. I'm sorry, I am a snob when it comes to my browsers. I know some people use Opera or Safari or Firefox. I use Chrome. I don't use anything else. I get annoyed at my iPhone when it tries to make me use any other browser than Chrome. Do you have a preference? Do you have a preference for browser? Either way, Internet Explorer, no more. So an interesting bit of news was dropped last week by Chris Silver-Smith. Twitter links are no-follow. Historically, they've been no-follow. Well, out of nowhere, they dropped no-follow. And this potentially is a really, really big deal because everyone links to Twitter. Now it could potentially pass PageRank towards your website using a Twitter link. That can fundamentally shake up how search engines work. But Chris kind of indicates that maybe this is something that Google and Twitter were working together on, that they collabed on, that Google was aware of because of how big a shift this would be. And even that said, Chris, shares about how back in 2019, Google kind of changed their approach to follow, no follow types of links, saying that no follows are more of a hint and less of a directive. So it might not have had the biggest impact that you would think, but it's still really interesting that a massive content producing type of social platform like Twitter would drop no follow. Be very interested to know if you're seeing anything when it comes to an increase or decrease in rankings due to Twitter backlinks. So Kevin Indig hit up Ahrefs. He's like, okay, what are your top 1,000 keywords based on search volume? Like in the entire compendium of Ahrefs, what words, what searches get the most volume? And he kind of analyzed it. It was very interesting. Some of the things that he found is like there's a massive power curve. So, the top, 10, 15, 20 of these are way more searched than anything else. A lot of them are brands. So, you've got Facebook is going to be like the number one search term, which is interesting. And I don't know, I can't help but laugh, but there's 70 million people that still search for Google on Google. But I get it. Sometimes I actually search for Google to look at if they've changed the homepage, which isn't always my homepage on Google. So that's not the most ridiculous thing. He identified that every 8th keyword, so basically like 20 out of the 100, give or take, is a near me search, which I think is really interesting. And I wonder if that's one of those situations where the search engine has trained us. Like, I don't know if people naturally would just look for like food near me or restaurant near me. It's that people almost know now that a near me will produce that type of result, but that's really dominating the top 1,000. And then finally, Yahoo and Yahoo Mail are still in the top 20, which means boomers are searching for those things which are long dead. I wonder where MySpace is. Is that the top 10,000? Transparently, my dad still has an AOL email address, so that's on him. Paddy Moogan of Aira Digital put out their State of Link Building in 2022, which is an awesome kind of report where they surveyed a ton of SEOs and asked them, how they were doing link building, and then got some analysis from a ton of great SEOs as well. Last year, teamed up with Women in Tech SEO. This year, doing it on their own, and some of the findings were fascinating. For instance, they found that when they asked what techniques do you use for link building, the top 3 were 68% content marketing specifically to generate links. So creating awesome content, but for the purpose of like, okay, that's going to make people want to link to it. 54% competitor analysis and targeting their links, and then 40% guest posting. Guest posting is still alive and well and worth the link juice. He asked, how effective do you think link building is in influencing organic search rankings, and the average score being 7.8 out of 10. Links matter. Link building is still a worthwhile endeavor because it is a high ranking factor. And finally, how has the demand for link building services changed over the last 12 months? Well, positive news for those who are link builders, it's increased 59%. So if you're on LinkedIn and you're doing outreach and you're asking people if they want link building, people need it, yay. I don't know if you've ever gotten that sort of person reach out to you on LinkedIn and they're like, hey, can I offer you some link building services? I got some link building services. You people, you can't do that anymore. We all know. I don't accept LinkedIn requests from people with link builder in their title because I know it's coming, right? So Benu Aggarwal of Milestone did a really interesting post on Search Engine Land all about why entity search is your competitive advantage. She breaks down like how search engines are evolving over time, not just looking at keywords, looking at more semantic search, and the idea of as you try to focus on being the comprehensive answer for an entity, entity, that you're more likely to jump up in the rankings. And over long term, it's not just individual keywords or specific like articles, that if you focus on the topic, that's more and more consistently what Google is looking for when they're providing search results. Are you the authority, the topical authority for the entity, or are you just doing like a one-off article that happens to be pretty decent? Using like entities as your focus for your content strategy is going to be the competitive advantage. And I agree with Benu on that. I agree. I think that is a way to think about your content going forward. So people always get confused or frustrated why Google Search Console analytics don't always match up with the Google Analytics. Like, why is there a discrepancy in the metrics when it comes to traffic? Well, Roger Montti did a kind of deep dive trying to explain it on Search Engine Journal. He explains that both of the tools kind of have different purposes, whereas Google Analytics is really about website performance. Google Search Console is more about search engine performance. And so there's a few different reasons as to why you might see different results, whether it's due to sampling, whether it's due to like personal identifying types of searches not being included in Google Search Console, or a time delay. Also, on Google Analytics, you might have multiple organic search engines, not just Google, so you'll see a discrepancy there. Ultimately, it actually makes sense why you wouldn't see an apples to apples like number of traffic to your site when you're looking at both platforms. But if you're working with clients or if you're working with the C-suite and you're trying to do reporting, it's good to know the why, and Roger breaks it down really well. Aleda Solis has updated learningseo.io. She's included some free courses that you can, start diving into. A lot of them are from the top SEO SaaS tools. So you'll see everything from like fundamentals of SEO to technical SEO to content optimization to link building, and from like SEMrush and Ahrefs and Moz. It's great to have all of those resources in one place. Aleda's resource of Learning SEO has become so comprehensive. It covers everything, but it's always great to see her continually adding to it, and finding those free courses that aren't going to cost you a dime is something you can do if you're just diving into SEO. So check that out. In technical SEO, Justavok of Yoast wrote this really interesting article all about why schema needs to be a graph. It's mostly in the context of WordPress, because obviously Yoast works with WordPress, but WordPress is broken up into blocks in their main editor. And, Juice was basically explaining how you can't just use schema to identify within each of those blocks. It creates a flat structure that's not a deeper site architecture when it comes to your structured data. He explains how using Yoast as a plugin, as example, that you can actually provide these different levels that, address the website level, the article level, if it's a how-to, like the step-by-step. Some great visuals there on how that works. So even if you're not using Yoast, if you're using WordPress or any website, it's important to think about the way that you're using schema to not kind of shoot yourself in the foot by not implementing it properly and breaking it up, as opposed to having it all graphed out and integrated. So check that out if you have more questions to Juiced. So I didn't see a ton of tools or features updated over the course of this past week. Maybe I missed it. If I did, you should let me know. But I did see a great tweet from Marco Giordano, who's a great follow on Twitter. And he listed 5 SEO tools that you should pay attention to if you're not familiar. They're overlooked. The 5 that he called out, which I think they're all really great, is 2 October's Explorer, which is by Noah Lerner, which is a great way to kind of dive into your Google Search Console data at scale. Noah continues to iterate on that, and it's an awesome, awesome tool. SEO Search Simulator to be able to check your SEOs on like a range of different countries. It's actually similar to the Pagescope by Mobile Moxie via Cindy Crum. So those 2 tools are freaking awesome to be able to check out those differences. SEO Testing by Nick Swan, so being able to test different hypotheses, whether it's like looking at a different template, looking at specific URLs and testing them, A/B testing them to see how they perform for traffic and clicks, which is really hard with SEO. So it's cool that Nick has that tool that he's been building. Exploding topics. So this is a Brian Dean tool of Backlinko. If you're interested more about exploding topics, you can check out the Rankable episode that I did with him last year. But basically it's like Google Trends. It's a way for you to look at all of these different trends that are happening in terms of search. Awesome, interesting tool there. And they actually have a newsletter that kind of like shoots these interesting trends into your inbox, which is fun. And then finally, there's also Asked, which is a Candor tool. Basically, it takes people also asked and generates a whole list of different, questions or what people are searching for after that initial query. It's a great way to do keyword research and content strategy to dive into, what people are looking for and to do that effectively. And that's Mark Tafferty and his team. Finally, when it comes to iPullrank, we had an awesome article come out by Andrew McDermott all around content governance at scale. So the idea of building a large content team, how it's really not easy when you're working in an enterprise and you want to consider, what content that you currently have, the types of people that you need, the different levels and what you're trying to execute, and your budget and resources. So tying that all towards the goals and objectives of your organization. It's more important than ever as we kind of, bust up on this impending recession. The teams that continue to put out content and focus on SEO, even when everyone is tightening their budgets, are going to come out stronger on the other end. So if you hurt a little now, you're gonna get some big wins later. And finally, on Thursday, June 30th at 1 p.m., we are hosting our next iPullrank webinar. This one's gonna be all about creative control, so how musicians can bring in money through their websites. We're working with Wes Walls at Benu. Him and Mike and Aaron are all going to get together and talk about the problem for artists to generate revenue where they're not just dependent on their labels or dependent on their platform streams or dependent on social media. They can use their website, create this fan journey to get people there, and then a ton of creative ways to generate revenue once you get them to your website. I'm excited for the webinar. It's in honor of Black Music Month, and it's going to be so cool. The registration link is in the notes. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the SEO Weekly. My name is Garrett Sussman of iPullrank. Of course, if you're into this, give us a subscribe. Just click on that subscribe. It helps the algorithm and helps you shoot up the charts. We're seeing more people watch, which is really cool. And share on Twitter, on Facebook. Do it TikTok. Well, that's harder to share on that, but please share on the LinkedIn, share on the socials. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. I will catch you next week. Signing off. Peace.